Welcome to Zoom Out Podcast. My name is Tim Niemeyer. I'm here with Mark Maraia. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Tim.
Mark is an entrepreneur and author of 2 business books who runs a business coaching firm that develops talent in the Bitcoin industry. He's also written more than 21 articles for Bitcoin Magazine and launched a group 1 year ago called the Chief Lightning Officers, of which I'm part of. This group of Bitcoiners are on a mission to educate local merchants and shop owners on the world's global and the only global and digital peer-to-peer payments rails. Mark, thank you for joining me.
More than happy to do it, Tim. Looking forward to the conversation.
And for those that don't know, speaking of Mark as a mentor, Mark has helped me tremendously. When I wrote History Echoes Bitcoin, he was my mentor through the whole thing. So I have an extra honor of having him on the podcast. So I'm going to jump right in and ask you the first question. I like to try and focus on not just Bitcoin, but financial freedom. And obviously, as a Bitcoiner, we see Bitcoin as the solution to financial freedom. I'm going to start right in there. Mark, what do you see that's holding people back from financial freedom?
I've thought a lot about that question. What I've concluded is for most people, it's just not their goal. And they haven't had training in it. So you're in the school system. We don't get trained and learn about anything as it relates to finance. And I would even say most people are financially illiterate. Now, I don't mean that they're dumb. They don't know what a balance sheet is. They don't know what an income statement is. Many today, because of our system, are debt slaves. So they don't know how money works. They don't know what inflation is, because really it's a form of, you could call it a form of theft or at least a hidden tax, depending on how you want to look at it. They don't know how banking works, and they don't really know how the financial system works. So with all those gaps, and the way I've described it, Tim, I think in 1 or 2 other podcasts that I've done, is our financial system and our banking system is probably 200 times worse than you can imagine. And so most people don't want to be depressed. They got a big enough set of problems in their life. They don't need to go through it. But if you ask most people, if they know, these 3 facts about the money in their bank, they wouldn't know the answer. The first one is, first of all, it's not their money because it's literally the bank's money. You've loaned the bank money as soon as you deposit it, and everyone thinks it's their money, and it's not. Sorry, bad news. But number 2, it's not there because they're doing the whole fractional reserve lending.
And is that somewhere between 0 and 10%, somewhere in there? How much does the bank actually have to hold on to?
They dropped it during COVID.
Yeah.
I don't think it's used to be 10% when it started 100 years ago. It's probably, we used to call it fractional reserve. I call it infinite reserve or infinitesimally reserved. They have requirements for reserves in banks, but it's got very little to do with lending anymore.
So let's say if somebody had $1,000 in the bank only historically had to hold on to about $100 of that.
Correct.
And they're lending out the rest. So when you say that the banks doesn't have their money, that's what you mean. It's like they're taking what you give them and loaning it out and just having like an IOU saying, we owe you this much, basically.
Yeah. They're banking on the idea, no pun intended, that all of us will deposit our money. We all want it at the same time. And then, of course, something like Silicon Valley Bank happens last March. But so that's the second one. And then the third is it's not even money. So our money in this, basically in every fiat currency around the world, is actually credit. It's an IOU. And so when you have a credit-based monetary system, it's literally not money. It's there's counterparty risk, which is a very fancy word for somebody on the other side has to honor your requirement in order to get paid, in this case, the government. So back to my point, which is people don't know how money works. They don't know what inflation is. They don't know how banking works, and they don't know how the financial system works. And so to me, all of those are necessary preconditions to understanding how bad the system is before you start to appreciate something like Bitcoin as a
So,
solution.
you said, as I was listening, I kind of remembered from education, the word ignorance. It's not a. We should be able to normalize that. It doesn't, like you said, it doesn't mean stupid. It means just
No.
not knowing. And for example, my daughter does a lot in dance, and my wife did ballet, and I am ignorant of ballet.
You
I
and
don't
me
know the
both.
first thing about it. That doesn't mean I'm stupid. That doesn't
Yep.
mean I couldn't learn and become a great ballerina, someday.
Yeah.
Who knows? But
Yeah.
ignorance just means not knowing, and we have to be aware of what we don't know in a way. And so,
Well, you don't have to be aware of what you don't know. You will pay a price
oof.
for not knowing. So I would be much more likely to be a debt slave if I haven't learned about money or credit or the banking system or the financial system. And, again, I could go on and on. I was both a banking lawyer and a securities litigator when I was a lawyer. And one of the things you learn in the financial system, because of the way it's set up, in fact, this will be very timely because of the ETFs. Even the BlackRocks of the world aren't going to hold the Bitcoin. They're going to use a custodian. And so when you have custodians holding your stocks, whatever it is, you can end up with more claims to the stock than there is actual stock. And take Bitcoin out of it in the ETFs. This happened in the Dole case. Caitlin Long was great at explaining this in one of her podcasts. I forget who she did it with. And when you start to understand the system at a very granular, deep level, you should have a healthy skepticism for very significant parts of the system. And again, when you don't have that awareness, you will end up being either a debt slave or you're likely to get the rug pulled on you without realizing what's happened.
So that rehypothecation, just saying that word, we could do a whole podcast on that rehypothecation. But from what I'm hearing, what I'm gathering is you're more susceptible to be a slave, for lack of a better word, to the things of which you're ignorant. Would that be a way to put it?
Correct. Yeah, correct. Same thing with health. If I don't know
Oh, geez,
what
yeah.
healthy food choices are, I might think I'm eating healthy and I'm getting sicker by the minute, but I don't know. I don't know any better. And
That
that
hits
there's two
hard for
things
me, yeah.
there's two things they don't teach in the school system that to me are really, really disappointing. One is healthy food choices, is nutrition, is health. And the other would be wealth or understanding the basics of finance. So actually two Novembers ago, 2022, myself and a couple of other folks who Anthony and Ryan,
Oh, yeah.
went into a seventh and eighth grade class, and we taught that class about money and banking and Bitcoin because of the very gap that we're talking about. They don't teach it in the school system, and candidly, I think that's mostly intentional. I don't think the school systems and governments really want an educated populace as it relates to money, banking, and the financial system. So we
That's
don't have it.
tough. Yeah,
But you
and
can do it yourself. That's the good news. You can do it
and
yourself
that
today without any. You could. It's amazing the resources that are available today. You and I are living testimony to that, right?
what's the is it? I think it was Mark Twain that says, "I don't let my my schooling get in the way of my education," or something to that
Yes.
effect. Uh,
Yes. Exactly.
so yeah, because
Exactly.
my kids come home and they're like, "We got to do homework and we got to do this," and oh, it's the weekend. I don't have to. It's like no, just
Right.
because you're clocked in or clocked out doesn't mean you should be learning or not learning. You should be learning at all moments. You should be aware enough to realize, is what I'm doing helping me or hurting me? Like you said with the health choices, I've been really digging in on that in the last few years, and you're absolutely right. We just don't know. And if I go
Right.
on a weekend and I'm thinking about other things, I may forget it if I'm not consciously thinking, being health conscious. And I think that ports over to the whole financially conscious. You need to be aware of what you're putting, what system you're using monetarily.
Exactly.
So, so
Exactly. It's the same thing.
if we lead that then towards Bitcoin, uh, if you were to be having this conversation with, let's say I'm completely not aware, not conscious of Bitcoin, what would be your personal
Yeah.
elevator pitch to me?
It will really depend and vary significantly depending on my audience. So
Absolutely,
if
100%.
one of my peers, so boomers, particularly usually they're affluent. I mean, I sort of started just like everybody else, kind of really all excited about it, and then I finally realized it's like the reality is if they have a certain amount of affluence and wealth, what I'll say is you probably don't need Bitcoin, and that's the starting point for them to lower the wall. Because otherwise they're going to think I'm selling them on Amway or the latest whatever Ponzi scheme, which of course Bitcoin has that reputation, completely unjustified. So when I'm dealing with my peer group, I am looking for whether or not they see flaws in the system that are keeping them awake at night. It might be preserving their wealth. It might be passing on their wealth. It might be purchasing power. It might be inflation. But so I'm always very curious. But what I would also say, here's the thing I wish more Bitcoiners would do, which is, and they don't usually get asked the question, so what is Bitcoin? And I've answered that in a lot of different ways. I'm sure you have too. In fact, I'd love to hear your answer when you get to ask that question.
Yeah.
But here's I've decided I usually answer it with a question, which is, okay, well, which Bitcoin are we talking about? Are we talking about the one where it's really volatile? It goes up and down. And yes, it goes up and down, but more to the upside.
More up
Or are
than
we
down.
talking about the network and the protocol that is bulletproof, bomb-proof, tank-proof, never been hacked, has grown constantly, has 820,000 blocks mined so far, and has done almost 1 billion transactions without ever having been hacked? Which one are you asking me about? And the reason I do that is because I want people to walk away curious. Because the goal isn't to convince them in 30 seconds or a minute that they need to buy Bitcoin, but can they get curious enough about some aspect of it? And you and I both know it's such a huge topic. You can know about Austrian economics, you can know about money, you can know about the banking system, you can know about fractional reserve banking. It hits on so many areas, but it really doesn't matter to the person you're talking to. All that matters to them is, does it solve a problem? If it does, can I make them curious enough to see it as a potential solution to that problem?
Well, and gosh, there's so much in there. One, I heard the Socratic method being used, which is just a fantastic teaching tool. But why it's fantastic is because it touches on what you were speaking about earlier about are you even conscious of the problem? And
Mm-hmm.
in your explanation to me, I was trying to listen to it as the first time I've ever heard about Bitcoin. And you start talking about all of these other things and, oh, it's a protocol, not just an asset. Well, you've just tripped that trigger for the curiosity trigger, if you will. So
Yeah.
now I'm thinking like, wait, I'm now aware of stuff that I wasn't aware of before. So now I can actually start to have that conversation. So it's building that awareness and not so much giving you a complete answer. I guess that's the best kind of elevator
Yes.
pitch in a way.
Well, exactly. I mean, you can give a short answer, and that may or may not satisfy. And again, if I'm dealing with somebody who's younger, what's really interesting is I've done some version of this because I've walked into, you and I have had this conversation, and I'm sure we'll get there. I've walked into all kinds of places where I spend money, and I've said, "Do you accept Lightning yet?" And when they find out it's Bitcoin, sometimes even when they're younger, they back away like I've just told them I'm a mass murderer. It's the weirdest thing you've ever seen.
It's a bank
And
heist.
yeah, but whatever. But I mean, I'm talking even just younger folks. But then there's other folks that lean in and they're really curious. Well, all you're really doing, yes, it's Socratic, but what it really is, Tim, is you're operating from a high level of curiosity. You, as the Bitcoiner, as the speaker, and you're listening at a hyper level to see where the pain point is, where the curiosity might make them want to go, oh, well, that's interesting. What do you mean, Mark? What do you mean it's a payment rail or it's a network or a protocol? Why would I care about that? Right? And again, you're I'm always trying to communicate. You're a teacher. I might use, if I'm coaching you, for example, I'll use teaching metaphors with you when I'm trying to make a point because I know you'll resonate with those experiences. If I'm dealing with lawyers, I'm going to use experiences of being a lawyer. If I'm a banker, I might use experiences of being a banker or a Wall Street finance type. I might try to use some of that. And you have to, this comment has been made a lot. You want to meet people where they are, and you do not ever, I don't find any value to helping people feel like they're stupid or that they're dumb. And,
No.
and, and, and without trying, I think one of the biggest mistakes Bitcoiners make is they end up making the person they're speaking to feel dumb. That may not have been their intention, but that's the effect. Particularly when you're not listening with the intent to try and understand their situation.
So it's kind of the Bitcoiners will end up kind of conflating the whole ignorant stupidity thing, or at least making the audience feel not that they're ignorant, that they don't know something. That's not a bad thing. It's just how there's nobody can know everything about everything, right?
Correct.
But somehow it crosses that from being ignorance to feeling maybe not stupid, but inferior or like the superiority thing. Because you're preaching to the choir. Like there's so many things that I've learned over the past 5 years, and I just want to share it with the people I care about.
Mm-hmm.
And the way in which I share it, it won't be received the right way if I'm doing what you're saying. That's tough.
If you come across as tell, so I mean, I basically taught people how to sell who hated selling, okay, or at least hated their idea of selling. And most people's idea of selling is telling, and telling isn't selling. Telling is a very, very, very poor form of selling. It's asking questions. It's being curious. It's having a service mindset. It's looking for a pain point that then you get their permission to inch into that topic, whether it's money, whether it's banking, whether it's the financial system, whether it's inflation, whether it's debt. And I've had enough conversations with Bitcoiners over the years, one of whom I remember, this is going back a couple of Christmases ago, and her sister was a lawyer in New York City. Now, again, I've worked with lawyers my whole career, and she's like, her sister just doesn't want anything to do with Bitcoin. And it was to the point where it was actually hurting her relationship with her sister. And I'm like, look, let it go. I mean, I understand that we both realize how powerful Bitcoin is, but your sister's basically working for the Cantillon class if she's a lawyer in New York City, and don't make Bitcoin the wall of separation you use to keep you from having a relationship with your sister. It isn't worth it. Let it go. Drop it. Unless she raises it, drop it.
Which is ironic because in all reality, Bitcoin is a system that allows everybody to come together, especially from different viewpoints. Bitcoin is for everybody, so that's
when
tough.
They're ready.
When they're ready,
it's for everybody. When they're ready. So that lawyer in New York, her sister, she might not get it for another 5 years. I mean, who cares?
Unfortunately,
the other thing.
We get Bitcoin. We get Bitcoin at the price we deserve. I've heard that, and that when you first hear that, it stings, but there's a little bit of truth to that.
Yeah, but again, so this will get into something that's to me a blind spot. I don't like that phrase, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
It's back to the reason why I answer the question when someone says, "What is Bitcoin?" The price you deserve is emphasizing what? The asset or the network?
Touche. Touche. It's at the
And
asset.
all you listen to every podcast in Bitcoin, almost without exception, and they will talk about the network and the protocol, but if you count the minutes where they're talking about these amazing immutable rails, immutable ledger, never been hacked, backed by millions of ASICs and an untold amount of energy, they're spending 99% of every podcast on the asset and almost nothing on the network and the protocol, which to me, both are amazing. I don't want to
Sure.
belabor or
And you
diminish,
can't have one without the other. Right.
and you can't have one without the other. Well, except that, again, it's a settlement rail. And again, go back to what are the problems that Bitcoin solves? Well, yes, it gives you hard money, but as they're learning with the whole ordinals and inscriptions and BRC20 token controversy, those folks recognize that Bitcoin isn't just an asset. What the other folks are saying, no, it is just an asset. It's only for money. Well, I'm sorry, it's an immutable ledger. I can make the case, me personally, for wanting to put stuff on there that literally can't be censored by what I think is the censorship industrial complex that's now fully ensconced in every aspect of our lives, whether we like it or not. And so that whole controversy to me, I understand why it's happening, but I don't, if you zoom out and you go, well, hold it.
Ah.
There's a network here. There's an immutable ledger. It happened to be used for money. And okay, you want to only use it for money. I'm okay with signing up for that. I think ordinals and inscriptions are mostly dumb, but you're forgetting that Bitcoin isn't just the small b asset. Bitcoin is also the big B network and protocol. And there's this, it's a settlement layer that's vastly
So
superior to
so
any
let's
other settlement layer that's ever existed in the history of humanity. And it's competing against 160 monopolies that don't want their asset, their money to leave the border. And you've got this other monetary system. It's interoperable. It'll go from here to El Salvador like that. It'll go from
so
here to China like that. It'll go from here to Japan like that. And you can have it illegal in every country in the world, and you and I can still use it.
so let's tie this
That's
together.
just
Let's
okay.
and I dig this because this is right where I'm going. Let's say I'm a local merchant.
Yep.
I'm battling with my own financial freedom or ignorance around that. Um, and you come to me and you are noticing my pain points because that's what you do. You're watching. You're meta. You're up here, conscious of the things that are holding me back, and you have all of this information about this settlement layer. So we have Bitcoin and we have the Lightning Network.
Yep.
Let's almost. I'm just throwing this on you just for fun. Let's kind of do a mock interview. You're coming to my shop. I'm selling you some coffee. You notice I don't take Bitcoin. You notice I don't take Lightning. How would you approach me?
Well, I said it earlier. I mean, literally, I more often than not, what I'll say is, "Hey, do you accept Lightning yet?"
What's that?
Well, Lightning is essentially a payment rail built on top of Bitcoin. That's, if you do it right, either almost free or very close to it. Instead of, if I'm using a charge card right now, you probably have to pay 4%, and then
But
I
I
stop.
thought, but I thought that isn't Bitcoin too volatile? Wouldn't I lose a lot of money? See,
That's a
I'm
yeah,
playing
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah. And
that's where I would
and
go. How would you approach that?
well, and again, but you made the assumption earlier that I've already identified their pain points. If I'm approaching somebody and I don't
Sure.
know their pain points,
Uh,
then we got to back up.
Well, and
So
that's kind of that.
I stopped there. I stopped there because I'm not going to try and sell them anything. It's like, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find out. So I did this. I've done this enough, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That in fact, there's a pie shop here in the Denver area, and it's what I've noticed is this: owners of the shop. It's not a chain. And you're talking to the owner, and they really don't like paying 4% every time there's a credit card charge. They're very interested and they won't react the way you did.
Good point.
Okay. But it may or may not be enough for them to add it, because it's very simple, as you know, to add Lightning as a payment rail. But does it integrate with their point of sale? I mean, there's a whole ton of things that get into it. But, it's zero fees, quick setup, but to me, it's a tool. So it's a lot easier. So I love this phrase. I'm trying to think of who used it first. But, if you're talking to a merchant, so about, I don't know if you made the last Chief Lightning Officers meeting. We had Gerardo and Evelyn, who are both Bitcoiners in Berlin, El Salvador, which is a small town, a mountain town. And they made it their mission to talk to merchants and owners about adopting Bitcoin and Lightning as payment rails. They were an all cash community for the most part. They didn't have Visa and MasterCard like us privileged Westerners. So it was a lot easier to convince them to provide and have them have a dinero electronico, is what they would call it, right? Electric money, or they would even say dinero US dollars. They would call it electronic
Oh,
US
wow.
dollars, which is it is true with Chiva Wallet, but we don't need to get into that. Well,
Yeah,
my
yeah.
point is, quickly they convinced, I think, 16 or 17 merchants to adopt it, and in less than 6 months they have
Wow.
onboarded over 100 merchants
And
to accept Lightning and Bitcoin.
that's impressive.
But here's the phrase: you don't need to sell life preservers on the Titanic.
Oof.
You don't need to. So the problem in the West, the problem with the shopkeepers here in the United States and in Canada and in Europe, again, all the more affluent, Australia, you have to find the pain point that makes them want to do it. And that's the whole reason why we started the Chief Lightning Officers, right? Because my belief was, oh my God, there's so many companies, there's so much development, there's the technology is like reaching out more and more to merchants and shopkeepers around the world. And the first and early adopters are not the ones in the developed world, they're in the developing world. Why? Because as bad as our monetary system is, it is unbelievably robust and beautiful by comparison to the payment rails in Africa. For example, there are thank you, Ray Youssef, for this stat, there are over 2,000 payment systems in the continent of Africa among the countries. 2,000.
Wow.
And only 2 or 3% talk to each other. All right, well, that's a prescription for financial, he calls it financial apartheid, and for monetary colonialism, another phrase that we could thank Alex Gladstein for.
Mm.
And so your conversation with a shop owner, like in Bitcoin Akazi, or someone in another community like Berlin in El Salvador, they are literally utilizing Bitcoin as a tourist attraction, and there are other residual benefits. So again, let's go back to Berlin. So not only have they onboarded these merchants, but in the conversation I had with Gerardo and Evelyn, they're actually, these individual merchants can now pay their suppliers, their water bill, their electric bill, without having to physically go down the street, wait in a line, and give them cash. Or get on a bus or get in a car and drive an hour and go and pay a bill. And all of a sudden, they are saving more time because they now have an electronic payment system that's interoperable and is so easy to use. To me, the thing that I will often do if I'm really trying to get one of my peers, and really I've done this with strangers in airports, I've done it with everybody. I've literally, rather than talk about Bitcoin, I'll say, well, hey, if you're open to it, I'll show you how easy it is to transact in it, because I don't know how my phone works, but I use it all the time. And I don't know how my computer works, but I use it all the time. But I said, it's really easy to use Lightning. So here, if you'll download this wallet, I'll send you some sats. And
So
I've done it a lot. And one of the things that's most striking to them is, all right, so what did you have to give them? Did you give them your name? No. How about your address? No. Well, how about your social security number? No. Phone number? No. Email address? No. I just sent you value. Now, again, if they're brand new to it, it's blowing their mind because they're not. But I've done it with enough people. They're like, oh yeah, that's really different than having to go and open a bank account.
So what I'm hearing through all of this, the common thread is it, whether it's saving in fees or the interoperability or not the inconvenience of the traditional system, it's a lot of leading to the deflationary aspect of it, leading to time freedom. And it kind of ties back in. I go back to the whole idea of financial freedom and us not being aware, maybe, and not as the sell per se, but an aspect, a pain point is like not having enough time. And look how
bingo, exactly.
So
And in fact,
financial freedom
Tim,
is time freedom, or time freedom is financial freedom.
And Tim, I think you're onto something. I think what needs to happen more by those of us who are Bitcoiners who value Bitcoin is to emphasize and look for people who want to claim more time. So that could be not only day to day for the Berlin merchants who are now saving time because they don't have to pay their electric bill in person with dollars, but it's also, I've done this in some version of this with my daughter and my son. You can probably retire sooner or at least have more options. And it gives you more optionality and it gives you a greater amount of freedom of when you work, where you work, and how long you work. Because if I have a money that's doing this rather than a money that's doing that over a decade, I'm going to have more options if I save in Bitcoin. Now, that's more of a Western concept. That won't be as meaningful to people in Africa or in South America or in Latin America. But for here, it will mean a lot. This goes back to the point I made earlier. You really want to understand and be very attuned to who you're speaking to and do your best to really dial in to what are their needs as they perceive them. And then you speak to them only in that way. And if Bitcoin, like you reacted earlier, it's like, well, hold it. Isn't that, volatile? Yeah. Okay, well, actually, if I come back and I'm thinking clearly, I'll go, well, you're thinking about the asset. Really, what I'm talking about is the Lightning Network.
Right.
And that's the network, and that's actually bulletproof, bomb-proof, tank-proof. If you don't want to hold the Bitcoin as Bitcoin, you can immediately convert it with some of the solutions into US dollars if that's what you'd like.
And in that situation, you're taking you've recognized where I'm not conscious about this, and just open it up a little bit, just to say, hey, there's all these other things that you could be experiencing and saving your time with. So if I were to wrap that up, then you and the chief lightning officers, your job is to take local merchants from 0 to 1 as quickly and effortlessly as possible to help them achieve a greater level of financial freedom and therefore time freedom. Is that a good summation, you'd say, or how would you put that?
I think it's a fair summation. I think, when I started it was really again, I spent most of my life teaching people who hated selling how to sell. Well, basically my goal was, all right, you've got this astonishing payment layer, settlement layer called Lightning, and nobody knows about it. Literally, it's a brand of its own, and to me, it's a Trojan horse. I think, and certainly in the global South and in the developing world, they're going to adopt Lightning way faster than we will. But as I've said, I think you were in one of the first calls. Forget selling merchants and business owners on Bitcoin as a revolution or Bitcoin as a movement. It's a tool. If they don't see it as a tool, pleasantly, hey, and particularly if you there all the time, be very pleasant. Hey, let me know if you have any questions. I'd be happy to answer, any
Right.
questions you have about it in the future. But literally, I start with, do you accept Lightning yet? And that's because I know, and again, to quote the great Wayne Gretzky, you got to skate to where the puck's going. You and I know probably in less than 5 years, maybe even less, the Lightning and all kinds of layer 2, not just Lightning, Arc, Fetty, there's a bunch.
Sure.
Those will have gotten so user friendly. They'll be better, faster, and cheaper, and more secure than anything in the US dollar system. And as much as our government's going to try and regulate it out of existence or try to close off the walls, I don't think they'll be able to outcompete the cypherpunks. So it'll be a tool, and it has utility. But my goal is to have as many merchants in my community adopt Lightning, so at least I have the option to spend Bitcoin in shops, craft brewers, restaurants. There's a dental office here in South Denver that now accepts Bitcoin.
Lovely.
You want as many of those options as you can, and it's going to keep happening. It's going to be early adopters first. And what the chief lightning officers really are doing is we're just trying to accelerate that, but only accelerate it at a level that's organic. We're not trying to force anything. Forcing things never
Good
works.
ideas don't require force. I say that over and over again. I absolutely love that.
And you don't need to sell life preservers on the Titanic. You don't need to convince people to use the greatest payment rails in the world if they already are experiencing pain. If they're not experiencing pain yet, just wait. It'll happen eventually, whether it's that the money's inflating or it's just that they hate paying 4%. So the pie shop owner I told you about, he's like, yeah. I said, you probably pay 3% on credit cards. He says, no, actually closer to 4%. And so he was very interested in talking with me because he's interested in anything that would help him opt out of basically, I would call that a negative tax. It's unnecessary, and it's not going to be like most of his customers tomorrow are going to start paying him in Bitcoin. It's not going to happen. But he actually gets free publicity. We could do podcasts. Tahini's out in is a restaurant in Ontario, Canada, and they've gotten more free publicity. It's a cheat code. Peter McCormick with his Real Bedford.
Soccer team.
It's a cheat code, and he's having a conference literally by that name. I would love to get. There's a craft brewer where I'm an investor. I'd love to get them to see that it's a cheat code for getting known globally when they're not even known in the United States well. And you and I both know Bitcoiners are sociopaths. They will go out of their way to support businesses in their region, in their area, because they really believe in what they're doing. Now, some want to hodl, which fine, but I'm not one of those people. It's like, you're not, as soon as you tell me you're hodling, you're ignoring that dichotomy I made earlier. You're seeing Bitcoin only as an asset, and you're just going to assume that the network's going to be there. The network and the protocol will always be there. They might be right, but I'd rather put it into use and have people using it in Berlin. So there's 100 merchants in Berlin using it.
Share the wealth, share the love. Absolutely. And I'm with you on that. And that took a lot of understanding to get from, and a lot of being aware of what I was ignorant on. I think
We're
that's a
all
great
still
place.
learning. Yeah.
Yes. I think that's a great place to wrap it up. Do you got any handoff for us before we wrap up? Where
Not
Chief Lightning Officers?
Yeah, well,
You
that
still?
meets every other week. If they want to join that group, there's one on Telegram that's literally called Chief Lightning Officers. Get in touch with you. I'm sure you can add them. We'd love to have you join if your voice, because there's a lot of communities. We have people from Portugal, we have people from the UK, people in Spain,
Do
all
you,
over the world.
do you do much in terms of customer facing? Like if somebody was a local merchant and they just wanted to be a fly on the wall, there's no problem with them joining in and listening in.
Not at all. In fact, what I really would love to do eventually is bring on a specific merchant and have every one of us sit there and brainstorm and help them figure out
Oh,
the best solution to their problem. It's like having 10 consultants for one merchant who could be a small shopkeeper in, Denver, Colorado, right? Or
that would be
Springfield,
my
Illinois.
that'd be my favorite form of kumbaya right there. Yeah, I
Well,
dig
and
it.
you know what, Tim, as another idea for future podcasts, I think it would be fun to bring on merchants to do exactly that. But here's a really cool and a big idea that I'd love to see funded. Of course, about total real estate makeovers. We need to
Yeah.
start a TV show that's basically the total lightning makeover, and
Oh
we
my
do
God.
it one shopkeeper, right? One shopkeeper at a time. Before, after, we do the financials. We show what the pain points were, and then we do an after. We show what we implemented. We show what they're doing now, and we can do it in Berlin a lot easier than we can do it in the United States, right?
That the
But
only downside I could see is that would take a merchant with enough awareness to be okay with showing their ignorance, to kind of tie it back to the ignorance. They have to
but
be
if
aware
it's
to be,
but if you put it
but if
on
it makes it better
national
for them,
But if you
yeah.
put it
Oh
on
yeah, think of all
national
the
television,
think about all.
it's
Oh,
like
yeah.
going on. So here's the thing: you go on Shark Tank and you don't make a deal.
Yeah.
Everyone thinks that's horrible. No,
You just
no.
got seen by how many
I
million
just got
people?
watched by hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people, and it's on reruns. So it is. So again, Chief, the lightning total lightning makeover. To me, that would be fun. It'd be either another podcast, but I think it'd be much more of a TV show where you're showing a before and after. But I'd love to have any merchants that in your town or any other part of the world, and they want to come on and ask us questions. That's what we're there for. We're there to, what I learned a long time ago as a coach is you want to stay in service to your client
I dig
always.
that.
And as soon as you stop listening to what they need, you're no longer in service to the client. And a lot of Bitcoiners unwittingly drift away from being in service to the client, and they're just too much of an evangelist for Bitcoin. Oh well,
That's
that's
that,
learning.
that's that's good advice. That's sage wisdom right there. Mark,
Yeah,
I'm going to put a link to the Chief Lightning Officers in the show notes. Thank you
perfect.
so much, Mark Maraia. Appreciate you being on Zoom Out's podcast.